Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lena, this is Lena's Bookshelf, and today we have a very anticipated video. I have been working on this one, getting ready to film it for quite a few weeks now, and it is my Jodi Picoult top recommendations. So I have read most of Jodi Picoult's books at this point. Today we're just going to talk about my top 8 favorites. I'm going to rank them from favorite to most favorite as we go along here. So first off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Jodi Picoult. If you don't know who she is an author that lives in New Hampshire with her husband and 3 children. Jodi has written 28 novels. A couple of those are YA, and she's also read a couple of short stories and novellas. One of her YA novels she even wrote with her daughter, and I believe one of her YA novels actually was turned into a musical last year. She sold approximately 40 million copies, and her books have also been translated into over 30 languages. I watched an interview with her on YouTube. I'll try and find it again and link it below, but she basically talks about how she would see things in social media or on the news and kind of ask herself, okay, but what if it happened like this? Or, but what if this happened? Or if that happened to me, what would I do? How would I respond? And so a lot of her novels deal with that. She also puts so much research into the books that she does, so much so that she seems like she's been working in whatever dynamic it is for her whole life. Like Leaving Time is about elephants, and you would think that she has worked at an elephant refuge for her whole life. She really immerses herself in the stories that she creates, and I just really love her books. I love her writing style. Sometimes her books tend to have a little bit of a lull in the middle of them. It gets a little bit slow before it gets to the big crescendo of her books, but I've come to expect that, and I've actually come to appreciate them. It's a little bit of emotional reprieve for me before we get into the nitty-gritty of a lot of the legalities of some of her stories. There are a lot of courtroom scenes in her books, and they're very well done. I have never read one of her courtroom scenes and felt like she was talking down to anybody, but I also haven't felt like it was too over my head. She does a good job of explaining the necessary legal jargon or presenting it in such a way that the reader is able to make educated guesses based on what they're talking about. So I did have to skim through some of these to kind of refresh my memory, because some of these I read a long time ago. I think I read my first Jodi Picoult book in middle school. So the first book I'm going to talk about is My Sister's Keeper, and this is about a family that has a daughter with an illness, and they find out that their daughter needs a bone marrow transplant, but neither of the parents are viable donors, so they actually use genetic testing and pre-implantation to actually give birth to a sister who will be a perfect bone marrow donor for Kate. So Anna goes through a lot of her childhood and early teen years, giving a lot to her sister: bone marrow, blood, lots of other things, lots of tests, and has to go through some different medical procedures to help her sister Kate. And she just decides that she's done. And so she seeks to become emancipated from her parents so that she can have autonomy over her own body. And the ending of this is unlike the ending of any other book I've ever read. If you have read it, or if you've seen the movie, because this was made into, I believe, a Lifetime movie a few years back, then you know how shocking this ending is. It's never what I saw coming. And that's something that I really like about Jodi's books. You oftentimes cannot predict the ending, and it's often unsatisfying or just heartbreaking. And you're left with that sense of, well, but this is real life. Sometimes you don't always have a happy ending. And I love that about Jodi's books. Another thing I really like about Jodi's books is that a lot of times she uses different fonts to depict different people talking. So it's pretty easy to follow along with the multiple POVs. I feel like most of her books, I think maybe all of these books that I'm going to talk about are written in multiple points of view. And so it's easy to keep up because you can just look at the different types of font and be able to remember, oh, okay, this is this person's font, or this is this person's font. The next book I'm going to talk about is Leaving Time, and this is about an elephant refuge. So this girl, Jenna, her mother disappeared in a tragic accident years ago. So she gets the help of a psychic and a detective to help her unravel the truth of what happened to her mother. While she was writing this, Jodi actually went and visited different elephant refuges over the course of writing this book. And so you wouldn't know that she hasn't studied elephants her entire life. There's so much good information in here, and a lot of psychology of elephants too, which sounds kind of crazy, but talks a lot about the herd mentality and like how elephants cry and how elephants mourn. So you're kind of following these three kind of different characters working together to figure out what happened to this girl's mother. And I love the characters in this book. Like, I still remember specific things about each of the characters. They're very unique and they're very thorough characters. Next, we have The Perfect Match, and this is about a mother whose son starts showing some different types of behavior, and she takes him to a psychiatrist, and the little boy tells the psychiatrist through various different play activities and tests and things like that he was actually sexually assaulted. When they further investigate, they find that this little boy was actually sexually assaulted by their priest. And the craziest part is that this woman whose son was sexually assaulted is actually a prosecutor that prosecutes child molesters. So this definitely pulls out a lot of loopholes in our justice system when it comes to prosecuting child molesters. And this also has some shocking, shocking twists. This is one of the first books that I think of when I think about that moral dilemma of how far would you go to protect your family? To what lengths would you go for your child? And this is totally that. Next, we have The Storyteller, and this is about a girl. Her name is Sage, and Sage is a baker. And while she's working at this bakery, she befriends this older man. I think his name is Joseph. Yeah, Joseph Weber. And Joseph befriends Sage and starts telling her stories. And some of them are shocking, and some of them are secrets that Sage then has to grapple with and figure out, is this something that I need to report? Is this something that he needs to be prosecuted for? And the story is set in the era of the Holocaust, so it does have a little bit of historical fiction elements to it, but it goes back and forth between Holocaust era and present day. And so it doesn't feel like you're reading historical fiction. It really feels like you're reading a story that somebody is telling you. Next, we have Handle with Care. And so in this one, you're following a woman whose daughter is born with brittle bones. She actually breaks something like 20 bones before she's born or something like that. And this actually deals with a wrongful birth case. So this deals with the question of, if you knew that your daughter was going to have a disability before they were born, would you still go through with it? Or would you give that child up for adoption? Or would you abort the pregnancy? And so this deals a lot with being the parent of a child with a severe disability and all of the hardships that go along with that, monetarily as well as physically, emotionally, mentally. So in order to protect her child, again, this woman has to go to some pretty serious lengths and ruin a lot of friendships and relationships with a lot of people in order to get the things that she needs for her daughter. Next, we have Plain Truth, and I believe this was also made into a movie a few years back. So in this one, the corpse of an infant is actually found in the dumpster of an Amish farm. And when they find out what happened, the Amish girl responsible is actually being prosecuted. And so you're following the attorney that is representing Katie, and you also get to hear a lot about Katie's past. I learned a lot about Amish culture in this. It is pretty graphic. Go in knowing that. All right, we're down to my top 2 Jodi Picoult books. So first we have Small Great Things, and this one I actually read for the first time. I listened to it on audio, and it was so good because it had a really great cast of narrators that really brought these characters to life. So I highly recommend the audiobook version. I remember finishing the audiobook and immediately starting back over at the beginning because I had to listen to it again. So in this book, you're following Ruth, and she is an African-American nurse in the labor and delivery department of a hospital, and she assists in the birth of this baby and then is very quickly told that she has been reassigned to another client. And when she looks into it, she finds out that the parents asked her to be removed from their infant's case because they're actually white supremacists, and so they did not want an African-American person touching their child. Well, later on, Ruth sees the child struggling to breathe and kind of has to stop and think, well, what do I do? They told me not to touch their child, but if I don't touch their child could die. But what if I touch their child and something bad still happens? But after she gives CPR to the infant, they actually charge her with some pretty serious medical malpractice charges. So this is a great commentary on racial prejudice in our country And the lawyer that's representing Ruth tries to say, oh, we shouldn't bring up race in the courtroom. And Ruth has to make her see that, yes, we need to bring up race in the courtroom, and this is a racial issue. And meanwhile, Ruth and her teenage son are trying to live as normal lives as possible. You get a lot of the backstory of a lot of these characters, which I always really appreciate in Jodi Picoult's novels. And this story was just so powerful, and I think it will stick with me for a very long time. I highly recommend this one, especially if you think that white supremacy is not an issue in our country. It totally is, and this is an example of it. All right, and for my number 1 Jodi Picoult book, we have 19 Minutes. This is a super powerful, impactful novel about school shooting. And this book starts after the school shooting takes place, and as you're going along, you kind of are learning everything that happened. And so many times in this book, I had chills. I felt so many different emotions in this book. Particularly, I think one of the first chapter talks about everything that you can do in 19 minutes, including murder other students in a public high school. You're also getting the perspective of the shooter's mother and how she has to grapple with all of the thoughts and feelings that she is now having to deal with. Is this nature? Is it nurture? Is it something that I did in the way I raised my child to lead to this? Were there early warning signs that I should have seen or been looking for? Am I to be held responsible for the actions of my son? And it's just so impactful and just heartbreaking. I remember finishing this and just feeling so many emotions. I mean, this book changed a lot of the way I look at our justice system in this world and our court system. And I highly recommend everybody read this book. Definitely look up trigger warnings going into it. There's a lot in here. It's very, very heavy stuff, but I think it's so worth it, and it's such a good read. Okay, those were my top 8 Jodi Picoult books. Like I said, these are the 8 that I think if you read any of these, you would have a great time and you would leave with a lot more information on whatever the subject is and a lot more empathy about some of these topics. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any Jodi Picoult books, and if so, which ones did you read? Also, let me know if any of these that I talked about are also your favorites. Thanks so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.